Welcome back to another journey through the grim darkness of the far future. Tonight we're venturing to the frozen reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus, to a death world where ice and fire wage eternal war, where warriors are forged not through doctrine, but through survival, and where the howl of the wolf echoes louder than any battle cry. We're exploring the space wolves, the Vilka Fenrika, the sons of Leman Russ. These aren't your typical space marines, bound by the rigid strictures of the Codex Astartes. No, these are warriors who follow a different path entirely, one carved by fang and claw, preserved in saga and song, bound by oaths that mean more than life itself. This is the Way of Fenris, and it's a story written in blood, frost, and unbreakable loyalty. Before we begin this saga, if you enjoy these deep explorations into the lore of science fiction's greatest universes, hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Now, settle in, perhaps with a warm drink to ward off the Fenrisian cold, as we unravel what makes the Space Wolves one of the most distinctive and beloved chapters in all of Warhammer 40,000. The Space Wolves stand apart from their brother chapters in ways both subtle and profound. Where other Space Marines might see themselves as angels of death, perfected weapons of the Emperor's will, the sons of Russ embrace something more primal, more visceral. They are warriors, yes, superhuman and deadly beyond measure, but they are also tribesmen, brothers bound by bonds that predate their transformation into transhuman killers. They feast together in great halls, recounting tales of glory and loss. They howl as they charge into battle, not in mindless rage, but in exultation, in the joy of the fight. They wear the pelts of great beasts they've slain, mark their armor with runes of protection and honor, and see warfare not as a grim duty to be endured, but as a saga to be lived. A story whose telling will echo through the ages. This is not the cold, calculated precision of the Ultramarines. This is not the grim determination of the Imperial Fists. This is warfare with a pulse, with passion, with the understanding that to be a warrior is to be fully alive in the moment of combat. The Space Wolves fight not just for victory, but for glory, for the chance to add their deeds to the great sagas of their chapter, to be remembered long after their bodies have fallen. Every battle is a verse in an epic poem. Every duel with an enemy champion is a scene that might be recounted around the fires of the Fang for 10,000 years. This is the heart of what makes them different. They remember, not in dusty archives or data cores, but in living memory, in stories told and retold. Each generation of warriors learning the deeds of those who came before by hearing their sagas sung by the rune priests. Their homeworld, Fenris, shapes them in ways both obvious and subtle. It is a death world in the truest sense, a planet whose very existence seems designed to test humanity to its limits and beyond. But from this crucible of ice and fire come warriors whose toughness is legendary, even among the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Wolves recruit exclusively from Fenris, not out of tradition alone, but out of necessity. Their gene seed, the Canis helix gifted by their Primarch Leman Russ, is unstable in ways that make it incompatible with populations from other worlds. Only Fenrisians possess the genetic resilience to survive the transformation, and even among them, many fall to the curse of the Wolfen, becoming the very beasts whose pelts their brothers wear. Yet this curse is also their greatest strength, the same genetic modification that risks turning them into savage mutants also grants them senses beyond even standard space marine enhancements. They can track prey across kilometers of frozen waste by scent alone. They can hear a heartbeat through armor. Their reflexes are honed to a predatory edge that makes them devastating in close combat. And perhaps most importantly, they possess an instinct, a feral awareness that warns them of danger and guides them to prey. They are hunters, the finest the Imperium has ever produced, and their quarry is the enemy of mankind in all its myriad forms. Fenris, the forging world. To understand the Space Wolves, you must first understand Fenris. This is not a hospitable world, not a garden paradise where life flourishes with ease. Fenris is a planet that hates its inhabitants, that tests them every day of their lives, and those who fail that test die quickly and without ceremony. Located in the galactic north of the Segmentum Solar, relatively close to the Eye of Terror, yet miraculously untainted by its influence, Fenris orbits its sun in a wildly elliptical path that creates seasonal extremes beyond anything found on more stable worlds. For the majority of the Fenrisian year, the planet is locked in winter's grip, and this is not the gentle winter of more temperate worlds, with snow that melts come spring, and cold that can be warded off with proper clothing. This is winter that freezes the very ocean solid, that drops temperatures so low that exposed flesh dies in minutes, that blankets the world in ice kilometers thick. The Fenrisian tribes must be prepared to move at a moment's notice, for the ice itself is treacherous, shifting and cracking without warning. They travel in dragon ships, simple wooden vessels that sail both water and ice with equal facility, moving from island to island in search of food and shelter. But if winter is harsh, summer is catastrophic in an entirely different way. As Fenris swings close to its sun during its elliptical orbit, the planet's crust itself begins to crack and shift. Volcanoes erupt with apocalyptic fury, spewing lava across lands that were frozen solid mere months before. The ice melts, not gently, but in cataclysmic floods and tidal waves that reshape entire coastlines. Islands that existed for a generation sink beneath the waves, while new land masses rise from the ocean floor, steaming and volcanic. This period, known to the Fenrisians as the time of fire and water, is when the geography of their world is rewritten, when entire tribes can be wiped out if they're caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Only one region of Fenris remains stable through these seasonal apocalypses. At the planet's northern pole rises the continent of Osaheim, a massive landmass that somehow remains unaffected by the tectonic violence that reshapes the rest of the world. It is here, at Osaheim's highest peak, that the Fang rises. This is the fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, perhaps the greatest bastion in the entire Imperium outside of the Imperial Palace on Terra itself. The Fang is not merely a structure built upon the mountain. It is the mountain, hollowed out and carved over millennia into a fortress that could withstand siege by an entire legion. The lower reaches of the Fang house the chapter's armories, training grounds, and the chambers where aspirants undergo their brutal transformation into space wolves. Higher up are the great feast halls where the warriors gather to eat and drink and tell their tales. The very peak of the structure, piercing the clouds, contains chambers known only to the Wolf Lords and the Great Wolf himself. From the outside, the Fang appears as a massive gray fang of rock jutting skyward, its surface dotted with gun emplacements and landing platforms, its very presence a declaration that this world belongs to the sons of Russ, and anyone who wishes to claim it will pay in blood. But Osaheim is not merely the location of the Fang. It is also home to the deadliest creatures on Fenris, animals that have adapted to the continent's stable but harsh environment. Here roam the Fenrisian wolves themselves, massive lupine predators whose size and intelligence far exceed their distant Terran cousins. A full-grown Fenrisian wolf stands as tall as a man at the shoulder, with jaws powerful enough to crush ceramite, and a cunning that makes them dangerous opponents even for space marines. The largest of their kind, the thunder wolves, are the size of horses, capable of bearing an armored warrior into battle, their very footfalls like thunder on the frozen ground. Snow trolls lumber through Osaheim's forests, enormous humanoid creatures with hides tough as stone and strength enough to tear a man in half. Shape-shifting doppelgangers haunt the shadows, creatures of nightmare that can mimic human form well enough to infiltrate tribal settlements before revealing their true, monstrous nature. Great worms burrow through rock and ice, creating tunnel networks that can destabilize entire mountainsides. And these are just the most common of Osaheim's deadly inhabitants. The continent is home to dozens of species, each more lethal than the last, each perfectly adapted to kill. It is into this environment that Fenrisian warriors who show promise are taken. The Space Wolves do not openly recruit in the manner of other chapters. Instead, they watch from afar, observing the tribal conflicts that rage across the islands during the winters, and the scrambles for survival during the times of fire and water. When a young warrior demonstrates exceptional courage, skill, or cunning, when he falls in battle with wounds that would kill a lesser man, but fights on until his last breath, then the Sky Warriors descend. To the Fenrisians below, the Space Wolves are mythical figures, gods or demigods who dwell in the sacred mountain of Osaheim, and occasionally choose worthy souls to join them in the realm above the clouds. The tribal culture of Fenris is one of constant warfare. Land is the most precious resource on a world where geography is literally redrawn twice per solar cycle. When new islands rise from the ocean during the time of fire and water, every tribe races to claim them, to establish settlements before other claimants arrive. These conflicts are brutal and unforgiving. Warriors fight with axes, swords, and spears forged from iron. For Fenris possesses no advanced technology beyond what the Space Wolves themselves bring. There are no lasguns among the tribes, no powered armor, no void ships, just muscle and skill and the will to survive. This constant warfare serves a purpose beyond mere survival. It creates warriors, men and women hardened by combat from their earliest years, who understand viscerally that hesitation means death, that mercy to an enemy today might mean extinction for your tribe tomorrow. It breeds a culture that values strength and courage above all else, that sees warfare not as an aberration, but as the natural state of existence. When these warriors are recruited into the Space Wolves, they don't need to be taught to fight. They've been fighting their entire lives. What they need to learn is discipline, how to channel their natural ferocity into something more than mere savagery. The Fenrisian language itself reflects this culture. It is a harsh tongue, full of guttural consonants and growled vowels, a language made for shouting battle cries across frozen fields and for telling tales around roaring fires. Many of the chapter's most important terms are in Fenrisian rather than High Gothic. They call themselves Vulca Fenrica, the Wolves of Fenris. Their battle cry is often simply, Fenris Yolda, Fenris endures. This is not merely linguistic tradition. It is a statement of identity. They are Fenrisians first, shaped by their harsh world, and Space Marines second, enhanced, but not fundamentally changed by their transformation. The planet's very hostility serves the Space Wolves in ways both practical and philosophical. Practically, it provides an endless supply of the toughest human stock in the Imperium, warriors who have been tested by Fenris itself before ever drinking from the cup of Wolfen. Philosophically, it teaches lessons that cannot be learned in any training hall. Fenris teaches that the universe is hostile, that survival requires constant vigilance, that brotherhood is the difference between life and death. When a tribe must work together perfectly to bring down a mammoth for food, when a single mistake during a sea voyage can doom everyone aboard, warriors learn quickly that they are stronger together than apart. This is the foundation of the pack mentality that defines the Space Wolves. They do not fight as individual heroes seeking personal glory, despite what outsiders might think. They fight as packs, each warrior aware of his brother's positions, each ready to exploit openings created by others, each trusting that his pack will cover his back as he covers theirs. This tactical flexibility, this ability to coordinate without rigid doctrine, makes them devastatingly effective in fluid combat situations where more rigid chapters might falter. Fenris also teaches acceptance of loss. On a death world, death is common. Tribes lose warriors to predators, to storms, to volcanic eruptions, to the 1,000 other dangers the planet presents. The Fenrisians do not deny death or pretend it doesn't exist. Instead, they celebrate the lives of the fallen, tell their stories, remember their deeds. This carries over into the Space Wolves' approach to casualties. They mourn their fallen, yes, but they also celebrate them, adding their sagas to the great oral history of the chapter. Death in battle is not tragedy, but apotheosis, the moment when a warrior's deeds are set forever in the chapter's memory. The Wolf King, Leman Russ. Every Space Marine chapter is shaped by its Primarch, the genetically engineered demigod from whose genetic material the chapter's gene seed is derived. But few Primarchs have left as indelible a mark on their sons as Leman Russ has on the Space Wolves. To understand the chapter, you must understand their father, the Wolf King, the Great Wolf, the Primarch who was as comfortable wrestling mammoths as commanding legions. Leman Russ's story begins, as do all Primarch stories, with the Emperor's grand project. Deep in the Emperor's laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains on Terra, 20 Primarchs were created, each a masterwork of genetic engineering, each designed to lead one of the 20 Space Marine legions that would conquer the galaxy in the name of humanity. But the Chaos Gods, seeing the threat these beings posed to their dominion, tore the infant Primarchs from their cradles and scattered them through the warp to distant worlds across the galaxy. The infant who would become Leman Russ fell to Fenris. His gestation pod crashed into the side of a mountain, and there, in the frozen wastes of the deadliest planet in the sector, the child was found not by humans, but by a she-wolf. She took the strange man-cub into her pack, nursing him alongside her own pups, and Russ grew to childhood among the wolves of Asaheim. He learned their ways, their pack dynamics, their hunting strategies. He learned to track by scent, to read the subtle signs of the forest, to howl in communication with his lupine brothers. 2 wolves in particular became his constant companions, enormous beasts he would later name Freki and Gary, meaning fierce and cunning in the Fenrisian tongue. It was hunger that eventually brought Russ into contact with humanity. The young Primarch, still more wolf than man in his thinking, led raids on the food stores of nearby Fenrisian settlements. The tribes, suffering from these raids, eventually sent a war party to eliminate the threat. They killed many of the wolves, including Russ's adoptive mother. But when they cornered the young Primarch himself, they found something unexpected. This was no mere beast. The creature they'd hunted was clearly partly human, despite its feral behavior. Rather than kill him, they brought him before King Thengir of the Russ tribe. The old king saw potential in the savage youth. Against the advice of many of his counselors, Thengir ordered that the boy be raised as a warrior of the tribe. It was a decision that would change not just Fenris, but the entire galaxy. Leman, as the king would eventually name him, Leman of the Russ, proved to be extraordinarily gifted. He learned the Fenrisian language with astonishing speed. He mastered weapons with an ease that left veteran warriors shaking their heads in disbelief. By the time he reached physical maturity, which he did with inhuman rapidity, Leman had no equal on Fenris. The legends of this period speak of impossible feats. Leman was said to be able to tear oak trees from the ground and snap them over his knee. He wrestled Fenrisian mammoths to the earth, creatures that weighed tons and whose tusks could pierce stone. He fought entire armies single-handedly and emerged without a scratch. He became so renowned that when King Thengir died, there was no question who would succeed him. King Leman of the Russ took the throne, and under his leadership the tribe prospered as never before. His wisdom in peace was matched only by his prowess in war, and soon all the tribes of Fenris acknowledged his authority. It was during this period of unified rule that the Emperor came to Fenris. The master of mankind had been searching for his scattered sons, and the legends coming from this frozen death world spoke of a king who could only be one of the missing Primarchs. The Emperor came to Leman's court disguised, cloaked in psychic runes of confusion and misdirection. But Leman, trusting his instincts more than his eyes, sensed something otherworldly about this newcomer. What followed has become legend among the space wolves. Leman challenged the stranger to prove himself worthy of respect. The first contest was one of eating. The Emperor, somewhat bemused, agreed, and the two feasted. Leman consumed an entire ox and declared himself the winner. The Emperor accepted the defeat gracefully. The second contest was drinking. Barrels of Fenrisian ale, potent enough to fell a mammoth, were brought forth. Leman drank until even his superhuman constitution was tested, and again declared victory as the stranger stopped first. The Emperor again conceded. But for the third contest, Leman boasted he could defeat the stranger in combat. This was his pride speaking, the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. The Emperor threw off his disguise, revealing himself in his true form, radiant and terrible, a being of power that dwarfed even a Primarch. The two fought, and despite Leman's incredible skill and strength, the Emperor struck him down with a single blow from his power gauntlet. Leman woke an hour later with a broken fang and a bloody smile. He had lost, truly lost, for the first time in his life. And in that moment, he found his father and his purpose. Leman of the Russ knelt and swore fealty to the Emperor of mankind. Within weeks, Leman Russ had been brought up to speed on the Imperium, the Great Crusade, and his role in it. He was given command of the 6th Legion, warriors who had been created using gene seed derived from his own DNA. These warriors, who would come to be known as the Space Wolves, had been among the more problematic legions before their Primarch's discovery. They were savage, difficult to control, prone to excessive violence even by the standards of the Legiones Astartes. Some called them barely better than the enemies they fought. Russ changed all that. When he first addressed his legion, he brought with him a contingent of his oath-sworn warriors from Fenris. Men who had followed him from the frozen wastes to the stars without truly understanding what they were getting into, but who trusted their king with their lives. Russ made it clear that loyalty, oath-keeping, and brotherhood would be the foundation of his legion. He valued the Fenrisian warriors for their loyalty even over the might of his space marines, at least until the Astartes proved themselves worthy of similar trust. It was a lesson that would define the space wolves forever. Power without honor means nothing. Strength without loyalty is worthless. Under Russ's leadership, the Space Wolves became one of the most effective legions in the Great Crusade. They excelled at shock assaults, hitting hard and fast before the enemy could organize a proper defense. They were unmatched in close-quarters combat, preferring to close with the enemy and tear them apart with chainsword and bolt pistol, rather than engage in protracted firefights. And they developed a particular specialty that would earn them both fear and respect throughout the Imperium. They became the Emperor's executioners. This was not a role Russ sought, but it was one he accepted without complaint. The Space Wolves were unleashed against those who broke their oaths to the Imperium, against commanders who failed in their duty, against entire planets that rebelled after accepting compliance. They did not revel in this dark work, but they understood its necessity. The Imperium was vast, held together by oaths and obligations. When those bonds were broken, when oath-breakers threatened to tear apart what the Emperor had built, someone had to bring them to heel. That someone was Leman Russ and his wolves. But Russ was not the simple barbarian some of his brother Primarchs believed him to be. He cultivated that image deliberately, playing the role of the savage, the barely civilized wolfman who preferred fighting to thinking. In truth, Russ was far more cunning than most gave him credit for. He understood politics and strategy at the highest levels. He simply chose to present himself as something less sophisticated, because enemies who underestimated him were easier to defeat. His brother Robute Gilliman recognized this, counting Russ among the dauntless few, the 4 Primarchs he trusted most. Gilliman once said he could win any war if he had Russ and his legion alongside the Ultramarines. Russ's relationships with his brother Primarchs were complex. With some, like Rogol Dorn and Ferris Manus, he formed bonds of mutual respect. But with others, friction was inevitable. His most famous rivalry was with Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. The two nearly came to blows multiple times, eventually engaging in a legendary duel that lasted for days. The fight ended when Russ, seeing the absurdity of 2 Primarchs pummeling each other while there were actual enemies to fight, began laughing. Lionel Johnson took this as mockery and knocked the still laughing Russ unconscious, then left the planet with his legion. The rivalry between the Space Wolves and Dark Angels has endured for 10,000 years because of that moment. But it was Russ's conflict with Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, that would have the most devastating consequences. Russ distrusted sorcery, seeing it as inherently corrupting. He and Magnus clashed repeatedly over the use of psychic powers, with Russ advocating strongly for their prohibition at the Council of Nicaea. When Magnus violated the Emperor's decree against sorcery, using forbidden powers to warn of Horus's treachery, it was Leman Russ who was dispatched to bring him to Terra for judgment. But Horus, already corrupted and working to bring as much of the Imperium down with him as possible, manipulated the situation. Russ's orders were changed from apprehend to destroy, and the Space Wolves fell upon Prospero in what would become known as the Burning of Prospero. This would haunt Russ for the rest of his life. He had been used, manipulated into attacking a brother who might have been saved, and in doing so, had driven Magnus and his legion into the arms of chaos. The Wolf King had always prided himself on his loyalty and duty, but in this instance, his loyalty had been used against him. It was a wound that never truly healed, a failure that no amount of subsequent victories could erase. During the heresy itself, Russ tried to make amends. He sought out Horus, determined to end the war by killing the War Master himself. The two Primarchs fought, and Russ actually managed to wound Horus with the Spear of Russ, inflicting an injury that may have contributed to the War Master's eventual defeat by the Emperor. But Russ hesitated at the crucial moment, unable to strike the killing blow against a brother he had once called friend. That hesitation nearly cost him his life. Only the intervention of his Space Wolves, who swarmed Horus in a suicidal assault, allowed Russ to escape alive but gravely wounded. After the heresy, Russ returned to Fenris. But something had changed. The war had taken its toll, not just physically, but spiritually. During the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension in 211.M31, Russ stood before his assembled legion and spoke words that have echoed through the millennia. "In the end, I will return, for the final battle, for the wolf time." Then, accompanied by his closest retainers, he departed into the Eye of Terror and was never seen again. Bjorn the Foul-Handed, who would later be interred in a dreadnought and become the oldest living space marine in existence, was left behind to lead the chapter. The Space Wolves have never stopped searching for their Primarch. Periodically, they mount what they call the Great Hunt, dispatching all 12 great companies in different directions to scour the galaxy for any sign of Russ. They have found nothing concrete, but the faith endures. The Space Wolves believe, with absolute certainty, that their Primarch will return when the Imperium faces its darkest hour, that he will lead them once more in the wolf time, the final battle at the end of all things. Blood and brotherhood, the Canis Helix. The transformation from human to space marine is never easy. It involves the implantation of 19 additional organs into the candidate's body, each designed to enhance capabilities beyond baseline human limits. But the Space Wolf's transformation is unique, more dangerous, and more transformative than any other chapter's process. At the heart of this difference is the Canis Helix, the genetic legacy of Leman Russ that gives the Space Wolves their wolf-like characteristics and makes them perhaps the deadliest close combat specialists in the Imperium. The Canis Helix is both blessing and curse. It grants the Space Wolves abilities that even other Space Marines cannot match. Their senses are hyper-acute. A Space Wolf can track a target across kilometers of wilderness by scent alone, can hear whispered conversations through walls of solid stone, can see in near total darkness as clearly as others see in daylight. Their reflexes are honed to a predatory edge, faster even than the already superhuman reactions of standard Astartes. Their teeth elongate into fangs capable of tearing through plasteel. Their skin toughens to a leathery consistency that can turn aside blades. They grow larger and more muscular than other space marines, their bodies packing on mass as the Canis helix reshapes them. But these gifts come with a terrible risk. The Canis helix is genetically unstable in ways that the gene seed of other Primarchs is not. It can, under certain conditions, cause a space wolf to devolve into a creature known as a wolfen, a savage lupine mutant that retains only fragments of its former humanity. This transformation can occur during the initial implantation process, or it can manifest years, even centuries later, triggered by extreme stress or simply by bad luck. The curse of the wolfen, as it's known, is the space wolf's eternal burden, the price they pay for their enhanced abilities. The process of becoming a space wolf begins when a promising warrior is selected from the tribes of Fenris. Usually this selection comes after the warrior has fallen in battle, wounded unto death, but still fighting. The space wolves' watchers, their choosers of the slain, observe these moments of supreme courage. When they see a warrior worthy of consideration, they descend from the fang and take the dying man. To the Fenrisians left behind, it appears that the Sky Warriors have claimed another hero for the realm above the clouds. They don't understand that the real trial is only beginning. The warrior wakes in the fang, his wounds healed by technology that seems like magic to someone from a tribal culture. He is given the choice: pledge himself to service in the Space Wolves, undergo the transformation that will make him superhuman, or return to his tribe. Few choose to return. The warrior culture of Fenris does not produce men who back down from challenges, and the chance to become one of the legendary Sky Warriors is the highest honor a Fenrisian can imagine. Those who accept are brought to the Cup of Wolfen. This ancient relic contains a genetic cocktail derived directly from Leman Russ's own genome. When the aspirant drinks from the cup, he imbibes the Canis helix in its rawest, most concentrated form. What follows is always agonizing and sometimes fatal. The aspirant's body begins to change immediately. Bones crack and reform. Muscles bulge and grow. Thick hair sprouts across the body. The senses sharpen to painful intensity. And most terrifying of all, the mind begins to slip toward the bestial. This is the first great test. The aspirant must retain his humanity even as his body tries to drag him into savagery. He is then cast out into the wilderness of Azaheim for the test of Morkai, named after the two-headed guardian of death in Fenrisian mythology. This trial requires the aspirant to make his way back to the Fang through territory filled with the deadliest predators on the planet. He has no weapons but his own changing body, no shelter but what he can find or build, no food but what he can hunt or scavenge. Many fail. They succumb completely to the transformation, becoming wolfen, who haunt the mountains of Azaheim, attacking future aspirants in their feral hunger. Others die to the many dangers of the region, torn apart by snow trolls or worms, or simply frozen to death in the killing cold. But some, the strongest and most willful, manage to fight their way back to the Fang. They arrive emaciated, covered in scars, often barely recognizable as the warriors who left. But they arrive human, or at least more human than beast. These are judged worthy to continue. The aspirants who survive the test of Morkai are then implanted with the remaining organs that will complete their transformation into space marines. These organs stabilize the effects of the Canis helix, preventing the runaway transformation that would turn them into wolfen. But even this stabilization is imperfect. Throughout a space wolf's life, he must constantly fight against the beast within. In moments of extreme stress, in the heat of battle, the curse can resurface. A warrior who has served honorably for centuries can suddenly feel the transformation beginning again, his consciousness slipping away as the wolf takes over. This is where the wolf priests come in. These individuals serve a dual role that other chapters split between chaplains and apothecaries. They are the spiritual guides of the chapter, keepers of the sagas, leaders of rituals, but they are also healers and geneticists, responsible for monitoring their brothers for signs of the curse. When a space wolf begins to show symptoms of impending transformation, the wolf priests must make a difficult decision. Can the warrior be brought back from the edge, his human consciousness restored through ritual and willpower? Or has he progressed too far, requiring isolation, or in extreme cases, a merciful death? The wolf priests use techniques passed down through generations, a mixture of genetic science and shamanic ritual that would seem bizarre to other chapters, but which the space wolves swear by. Healing bombs created from native Fenrisian plants, chants and songs that call the warrior back to himself, and in some cases direct intervention with their gene seed, attempting to stabilize the Canis helix before the transformation becomes irreversible. It's an inexact science at best, more art than medicine. But the wolf priests have had 10,000 years to perfect their craft. The curse has shaped the space wolves' approach to creating successor chapters. After the Horus Heresy, when the Space Marine legions were divided into smaller chapters, per the dictates of the Codex Astartes, the Space Wolves reluctantly agreed to found one successor chapter, the Wolf Brothers. It was a disaster. The Wolf Brothers, lacking the stability that Fenrisian genetic stock provided, and separated from the careful ministrations of experienced wolf priests, fell wholesale to the curse of the Wolfen within a generation. The chapter was disbanded, its surviving members either put down or absorbed back into the Space Wolves. Since then, the chapter has steadfastly refused to create further successors, arguing that the Canis Helix is simply too unstable to be entrusted to anyone who cannot draw recruits from Fenris and benefit from the accumulated wisdom of the chapter's wolf priests. This changed somewhat during the dark days of the 13th Black Crusade and the opening of the Great Rift. The Primaris reinforcements created by Belisarius Cawl included space wolves among their number, and these warriors bore modified gene seed that supposedly stabilized some of the Canis Helix's more problematic traits. The chapter's leadership accepted these reinforcements, though not without reservation. Time will tell whether Call's modifications truly solve the problem or merely delay the inevitable manifestation of the curse. The Wolfen themselves present a moral and practical dilemma. These transformed warriors are abominations by imperial standards, mutants who should be destroyed on sight. The Inquisition has repeatedly demanded that the Space Wolves purge all Wolfen from their ranks. But the Space Wolves refuse. They see the Wolfen not as monsters, but as brothers who have fallen to a curse that could claim any of them. More than that, they recognize that the Wolfen still serve in their own way. These creatures retain fragments of their former selves, enough to recognize allies and enemies. In battle, they are devastating, attacking with animalistic fury that makes even other space wolves look restrained. The chapter maintains packs of Wolfen in the deepest levels of the Fang, guarded carefully and released only when the need is dire. When these packs are unleashed, they tear through enemy lines like a force of nature. Claws that can shred ceramite, teeth that bite through plasteel, and a savage ferocity that knows no fear or hesitation make them terrifying opponents. They are used as shock troops, hurled at the strongest enemy positions where their animal rage can do the most damage. After the battle, they are carefully rounded up and returned to their cells, mourned by their brothers who know that any of them could suffer the same fate. The return of actual Wolfen from the warp during the 13th Black Crusade complicated matters further. These were space wolves from the 13th Great Company, the warriors who had pursued the Thousand Suns into the Eye of Terror during the Horus Heresy and been lost for 10,000 years. They emerged changed. Many of them transformed into Wolfen, but they still fought for the Emperor and recognized their brothers. Their arrival forced the Space Wolves to acknowledge publicly what they had long known privately. The curse of the Wolfen was real. It was permanent, and it was part of what made them who they were. The Canis Helix also manifests in more subtle ways. All space wolves possess what they call the wolf's sense, an instinctive awareness that warns them of danger and guides them toward prey. It's not psychic in nature, or at least not in the way librarians are psychic. It's something deeper, more primal, a connection to their lupine nature that transcends normal sensory input. A space wolf might wake from sleep knowing enemies are approaching. He might turn at just the right moment to catch a hidden assassin. He might choose one path over another because it feels right, only to discover later that the other path was trapped or blocked. This instinct makes them devastatingly effective hunters. When the space wolves are unleashed on a target, whether it's an individual or an entire army, they track with relentless efficiency. They can follow a trail that other forces would lose, They can sense ambushes before walking into them. They can predict enemy movements with accuracy that seems supernatural, but is simply the result of hyperacute senses combined with predatory instinct honed over years of warfare. The brotherhood that forms between space wolves is deeper than simple camaraderie. When you've drunk from the cup of Wolfen with someone, when you've fought beside them through the test of Morkai, when you've shed blood together in countless battles, when you know that either of you could fall to the curse at any moment and need the other to either bring you back or grant you a merciful death, that creates bonds that transcend normal friendship. Pack brothers know each other at a level that's almost psychic, able to coordinate in battle with minimal communication, trusting implicitly in each other's abilities and intentions. This is why the Space Wolves organize themselves into great companies, rather than following the Codex Astartes company structure. Each great company is essentially an extended pack, warriors who have fought together for decades or centuries, who know each other's strengths and weaknesses intimately. They feast together, fight together, mourn their fallen together. The Wolf Lord who leads each great company is not merely a commander, but a pack alpha, a warrior who has proven himself in countless battles and earned the absolute loyalty of his brothers. In the culture of the Space Wolves, an oath is not merely words spoken into air. It is a binding force more real than chains, more permanent than any written contract. To swear an oath is to pledge not just your actions, but your very soul. To break an oath is to become outcast, worthless, deserving of neither honor in life nor remembrance in death. This philosophy, inherited from the tribal cultures of Fenris and reinforced by the teachings of Leman Russ, permeates every aspect of the chapter's existence. The most fundamental oath every Space Wolf swears is the Oath of Initiation, spoken after surviving the test of Morkai and before receiving the final implants that will complete his transformation. The exact wording varies slightly between great companies, each Wolf Lord having his own traditions, but the essence remains the same. The aspirant swears to defend humanity against all enemies, to stand by his brothers unto death, to honor the memory of Leman Russ and fight in his name, and to never break faith with the Emperor of mankind. This oath is sworn not before a chaplain or company standard, as in other chapters, but before the assembled warriors of the great company, with the Wolf Lord himself standing as witness. Once sworn, this oath becomes the foundation of the Space Wolf's existence. Everything he does, every battle he fights, every decision he makes must be measured against this pledge. The oath is not a burden, but a source of strength, a touchstone to return to in moments of doubt or despair. When a Space Wolf is gravely wounded, when the curse of the Wolfen threatens to overwhelm him, when he faces odds that seem insurmountable, he returns to his oath. He remembers what he swore, who he swore it to, and finds the will to continue. But beyond this fundamental oath, Space Wolves swear many others throughout their lives. A Bloodclaw, a young warrior newly initiated into the chapter, might swear an oath to never retreat from the enemy, or to be the first through every breach, or to slay a certain number of foes before the campaign ends. These oaths are born from youthful enthusiasm and the burning need to prove oneself worthy, and the other warriors indulge them with knowing smiles, remembering their own days of reckless oath-making. As warriors mature into gray hunters, the veteran core of any great company, their oaths become more measured but no less binding. A gray hunter might swear to protect a specific brother, having seen him fall in battle and been inspired by his courage. Another might swear to recover a relic lost to the enemy, dedicating himself to that quest until it is fulfilled or he dies in the attempt. These oaths are witnessed by pack brothers and recorded by the rune priests, becoming part of the warrior's personal saga. The Wolf Guard, the most veteran warriors of each great company, often swear oaths of such magnitude that lesser men would blanch at the mere thought. These are warriors who have survived centuries of warfare, who have proven themselves in battles beyond counting, and their oaths reflect their capabilities. A Wolf Guard might swear to hunt down and destroy an entire warband of Chaos Space Marines. Another might pledge to stand guard over a particular world or system, ensuring that no harm befalls it while he lives. These are not rash promises, but calculated commitments, made with full understanding of what they entail. The Wolf Lords themselves, the commanders of the great companies, have sworn oaths to the Great Wolf, the overall leader of the chapter. These oaths bind them to follow his commands, to come when called, to set aside their own ambitions in service of the chapter as a whole. But within those constraints, Wolf Lords have remarkable autonomy. They lead their great companies as they see fit, making their own decisions about where to fight and how to prosecute their campaigns, so long as they honor their sworn obligations. The Great Wolf, in turn, has sworn oaths to the Emperor and to the memory of Leman Russ. He is the ultimate authority within the chapter, but that authority is tempered by responsibility. He must lead wisely, must consider the counsel of his Wolf Lords and the wisdom of the rune priests, must ensure that the chapter's actions honor their Primarch's legacy. The position is not hereditary or rotational, but earned through deeds. When a great wolf falls, the Wolf Lords gather, and the position goes to whomever they judge most worthy, typically the one whose own saga of deeds is most impressive. Oaths between individuals create bonds that transcend the normal command structure. A warrior might swear an oath of brotherhood to someone from a different great company, pledging to come to their aid if called, regardless of other obligations. These oath bonds create a web of personal loyalty throughout the chapter, ensuring that even great companies separated by vast distances remain connected through chains of mutual obligation. The Fenrisian tradition of oath-swearing extends to their relationships with other Imperial forces as well. When the Space Wolves fight alongside Imperial Guard regiments or other chapters, they often swear oaths to specific commanders or units. These are not merely diplomatic niceties, but genuine commitments. If a Space Wolf has sworn to protect an Imperial Guard regiment, he will do so, even at great personal cost, because his honor demands it. This has occasionally caused friction with other Imperial forces, who view such oaths as unnecessary, or who don't understand the absolute seriousness with which the Space Wolves treat them. Breaking an oath is the gravest sin a Space Wolf can commit. It is worse than cowardice, worse than failure. worse even than falling to the curse of the Wolfen. A warrior who breaks his oath becomes oath-broken, stripped of his honor and cast out from his great company. He is not executed, for that would be too merciful. Instead, he is exiled, forced to wander alone until he can find a way to redeem himself through some act of such extraordinary courage or sacrifice that it balances the scales. Many oath-broken warriors never achieve this redemption, dying alone and unmourned, their names stricken from the sagas. However, the Space Wolves also understand that circumstances can make fulfilling an oath impossible. If a warrior has sworn to protect a particular person, and that person dies despite his best efforts, he is not considered oath-broken. The intent and effort matter as much as the outcome. What cannot be forgiven is willfully abandoning an oath, choosing to break faith for personal gain or out of cowardice. This is betrayal, not just of the person to whom the oath was sworn, but of the entire concept of honor that holds the chapter together. The rune priests play a crucial role in the oath culture of the Space Wolves. They witness the most important oaths, inscribing them in runes on stone tablets kept in the deepest vaults of the Fang. They also serve as judges when disputes arise about whether an oath has been fulfilled or broken. Their word on such matters is final, for the rune priests are not merely warriors, but also shamans, connected to the spiritual traditions of Fenris in ways that transcend their role as the chapter's librarians. Oaths also serve a practical purpose in maintaining discipline within a chapter that often appears unruly to outsiders. The Space Wolves do not have the rigid command structure of Codex-compliant chapters. They argue openly with their superiors, question orders they disagree with, and sometimes refuse commands they consider dishonorable. But beneath this apparent chaos lies the bedrock of oath law. A wolf lord might argue strenuously against a particular course of action, but once he has sworn to follow the great wolf's commands, he will execute those orders with absolute commitment, even if he still thinks they're wrong. This creates a dynamic where honest disagreement is not only permitted, but encouraged, because the Space Wolves believe that the best decisions come from hearing all perspectives. But once a decision is made and oaths compel action, all debate ends. The chapter moves as one, united by bonds of loyalty that run deeper than any disagreement over tactics or strategy. It is a balance that few other chapters achieve, combining individual initiative with collective purpose in a way that makes them extraordinarily flexible on the battlefield. The oath culture also affects how the Space Wolves interact with mortals. They do not view baseline humans as inferior beings to be dismissed or exploited. The Space Wolves remember that they themselves were once mortal, were once Fenrisian tribesmen who knew nothing of the galaxy beyond their frozen islands. This creates a degree of empathy unusual among Space Marines. When they fight to defend Imperial worlds, they fight not out of abstract duty, but because they have, in a sense, sworn an oath to humanity itself. These are their people, the people they were created to protect, and that obligation is as real as any oath sworn to a brother warrior. Outsiders sometimes mistake the Space Wolves' oath culture for inflexibility, thinking that warriors bound by so many vows must lack adaptability. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. The oaths provide structure, yes, but within that structure is enormous freedom. A space wolf who is sworn to destroy an enemy warband has not sworn to do it in any particular way. He might choose stealth and assassination, or frontal assault, or siege warfare, or any of 100 other approaches. The oath specifies the outcome, not the method. This gives space wolves the freedom to adapt their tactics to circumstances while still maintaining their honor. Sagas, the living memory. Walk into any other Space Marine chapter's fortress monastery and you will find libraries, vast archives of data cores and ancient books, carefully preserved records of every battle fought, every victory won, every warrior fallen. The Ultramarines maintain meticulous records going back 10,000 years. The Dark Angels keep secrets upon secrets in their locked archives. The Blood Angels preserve artworks and writings of such beauty that they move even non-Astartes to tears. But walk into the Fang, into the great feast halls of the Space Wolves, and you will find something different. You will find warriors, gathered around fires and tables, drinking and eating, and above all, telling stories. This is how the Space Wolves preserve their history. Not in cold data cores, but in living memory, passed from generation to generation through the ancient tradition of saga telling. Every warrior's deeds, every battle fought, every enemy defeated, every brother lost. All of it is remembered not as dry facts, but as stories, tales told with passion and detail, evolving slightly with each telling, but maintaining their essential truth. The rune priests serve as the primary keepers of these sagas. They are trained from their earliest days not just in the use of psychic powers, but in the art of memory, in techniques that allow them to recall vast amounts of information with perfect clarity. A rune priest can recite the saga of any wolf lord going back generations, can tell you the circumstances of battles fought thousands of years before he was born, can trace lineages and honor debts and oath bonds through centuries of history. They are living libraries, their minds containing more information than many chapters' entire archives. But saga keeping is not the exclusive province of the rune priests. Every space wolf is expected to know the sagas of his great company, to be able to recite the deeds of the warriors who came before him, to add his own chapter to the ongoing story. When a pack gathers after battle, when they feast in the halls of the Fang, the stories flow as freely as the ale. Warriors recount their own experiences, embellishing slightly perhaps, but staying true to the essential facts. Others add verses to running sagas, continuing stories that might have begun centuries earlier. This oral tradition serves multiple purposes. Most obviously, it preserves the chapter's history, ensuring that the deeds of the fallen are not forgotten. But it also serves as education, teaching younger warriors valuable lessons through the examples of those who came before. It reinforces the chapter's values, as the sagas naturally emphasize themes of loyalty, courage, and honor. And it creates a sense of continuity, connecting each generation of space wolves to all those who preceded them. The structure of Space Wolves sagas follows Fenrisian tradition. They are composed in a specific meter, with strong alliteration and a rhythmic quality that makes them easier to remember and more powerful when recited aloud. The language is deliberately archaic, using terms and constructions from ancient Fenrisian that might seem strange to outsiders, but which carry deep cultural weight for the Space Wolves themselves. When a rune priest stands to recite a saga before the assembled warriors, it is not merely information being conveyed, but a ritual being performed, a connection being forged between past and present. The most important sagas are those of the wolf lords who command the great companies. Each wolf lord's saga begins with his selection from the tribes of Fenris and follows his entire career, growing with each campaign he leads, each victory he achieves, each challenge he overcomes. These sagas can take hours to recite in full, covering centuries of service. They are added to constantly, new verses composed after each major battle or significant event. When a wolf lord finally falls in battle, his saga is complete, a finished work that will be recited for generations, his deeds immortalized in the living memory of the chapter. Logan Grimnar, the current Great Wolf, has one of the longest and most complex sagas in the chapter's history. He has led the Space Wolves for over 500 years, during which time he has fought in countless battles, faced down enemies ranging from chaos warbands to tyrannid hive fleets, and stood up to the Inquisition itself when he believed they were acting unjustly. His saga includes the defense of Armageddon, where he saved billions of lives, but clashed with the Inquisition over their attempt to purge the entire population to prevent chaos taint. It includes his duel with the demon Primarch Magnus the Red, where Grimnar wielded the Axe Morkai and banished the sorcerer back to the warp. His saga is still being written, new verses added with each campaign, and already it is clear that future generations will remember Logan Grimnar as one of the greatest space wolves who ever lived. But the sagas do not focus solely on wolf lords. Every warrior, from the youngest Bloodclaw to the most ancient Wolfguard, has his own saga. These personal sagas might never be recited before the entire chapter, might only be told among pack brothers, but they are no less important. They record the individual's journey, his triumphs and failures, his oaths sworn and fulfilled, his brothers saved and lost. When a space wolf falls in battle, his pack brothers will tell his saga at the funeral feast, ensuring that his deeds are remembered and that his spirit can find its way to the halls of the Einherjar, the Fenrisian afterlife where warriors feast and fight for eternity. The sagas also serve a psychological purpose. Being remembered is, for the Space Wolves, a form of immortality. A warrior who knows his deeds will be recounted long after his death fights with particular ferocity, not out of recklessness, but from the desire to make his saga worthy of the telling. This creates a powerful incentive structure that encourages courage and heroism. The greatest shame a space wolf can imagine is dying in a way that leaves no story, accomplishing nothing worthy of remembrance. Better to die gloriously, even in defeat, than to survive through cowardice or inaction. This emphasis on memorable deeds can sometimes put the Space Wolves at odds with more pragmatic chapters. An ultramarine might achieve victory through careful planning and methodical execution, winning a battle with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. A space wolf might achieve the same victory through a daring assault that costs more lives but creates a better story. Both are valid approaches, but they reflect fundamentally different value systems. The ultramarine values efficiency and adherence to doctrine. The space wolf values the creation of a saga worthy of remembrance. The process of composing new verses for an ongoing saga is taken seriously. After a major battle, the rune priests will gather with the warriors who fought in it, collecting accounts from multiple perspectives. They will then compose verses that capture the essential events while maintaining the saga's traditional structure and meter. These verses are typically presented at the feast celebrating the victory, where they are recited publicly for the first time. The warriors who fought in the battles serve as an audience and fact-checkers, ready to correct any details that don't match their recollection of events. This collective approach to saga composition ensures accuracy, while also allowing for artistic interpretation. The basic facts must be correct, but the way they are presented, the emphasis given to different elements, the specific language used, all of these are subject to the rune priest's artistic judgment. A skilled saga composer can take the raw material of a battle and create something that not only records what happened, but captures why it mattered, what it meant to the warriors who fought it, how it connects to the broader story of the chapter. The sagas also contain warnings and lessons about failure. The Space Wolves do not erase their defeats or gloss over their mistakes. The burning of Prosperel, for instance, is remembered in saga form that includes verses about the manipulation by Horus, about the doubt that plagued Leman Russ afterward, about the terrible cost of the victory. These verses are uncomfortable to hear, but they serve a purpose. They remind the chapter that even the greatest heroes can be deceived, that loyalty without wisdom can be as dangerous as treachery, that victory can be poisoned by the circumstances surrounding it. Similarly, the sagas of warriors who fell to the curse of the Wolfen are preserved, though they are tragic in tone. These sagas do not celebrate the transformation but mourn it, acknowledging that the warrior fought valiantly against the curse before ultimately succumbing. They serve as reminders of the price the chapter pays for the power of the Canis Helix, and they honor the courage it takes to continue fighting, even when you know the curse might claim you at any moment. The oral
tradition does have limitations. Details can be lost or altered over time, especially for events that occurred thousands of years in the past. Verses can be misremembered or deliberately changed by later composers who want to emphasize different aspects of a story. The Space Wolves are aware of these limitations and accept them as the price of their chosen method of preservation. They believe that the essential truth of a saga, the core meaning, and the basic facts are what matter. The exact details of how many enemies were slain or which weapon was used are less important than capturing the spirit of the event. This approach would horrify chapters like the Ultramarines, who value precision and accurate record-keeping above all else. But the Space Wolves would counter that their sagas preserve something that data cores cannot: the emotional truth of events, the human, or transhuman, experience of the warriors who lived through them. When you read a battle report in an archive, you learn what happened. When you hear a saga recited by a rune priest in the halls of the Fang, you understand what it meant to the warriors who fought that battle. That difference to the Space Wolves is everything. Tooth and claw, combat philosophy. The Space Wolves' approach to warfare is distinctive, even among the already fearsome Space Marines. While all Astartes are deadly warriors, masters of combat in all its forms, the sons of Russ have elevated close-quarters battle to an art form. They are at their most dangerous when the enemy is close enough to smell, when the fight becomes personal, when they can tear into their foes with chainsword and bolt pistol, with axe and blade, with fang and claw if necessary. This preference for close combat is not mere savagery or lack of discipline. It is a calculated, tactical choice based on the chapter's unique capabilities and philosophical approach to war. The enhanced senses granted by the Canis Helix make the Space Wolves supremely effective in the chaos of melee combat. Where other warriors might struggle to track targets in the confusion of close-quarters fighting, a Space Wolf can pinpoint enemies by sound and scent. Where others might accidentally strike allies in the press of battle, a Space Wolf knows instinctively where his pack brothers are. The very conditions that make melee combat so chaotic and dangerous play to the Space Wolves' strengths. But it goes deeper than simple capability. The Space Wolves believe that close combat reveals truth. When you fight an enemy at range, with missiles and las cannons and artillery, there is a disconnect. You might never see your opponent, never know if your shots found their mark. But when you close with an enemy, when you look into their eyes as you cross blades, when you can hear their breath and smell their fear, that is real. That is honest. The Space Wolves do not seek to sanitize warfare or distance themselves from its horror. They embrace it fully, accepting that war is brutal and personal, and that trying to pretend otherwise is self-deception. This philosophy manifests in their choice of war gear. While Space Wolves certainly employ ranged weapons, bolters and plasma guns and meltaguns are all part of their arsenal. They show a marked preference for weapons that excel in close quarters. Frost weapons, power axes and swords imbued with energy fields that can freeze flesh solid, even as they cleave through armor. Chainswords that roar with savage glee as their teeth bite into enemy flesh. Thunder hammers that strike with the force of landslides. These are the weapons the Space Wolves favor, and they wield them with masterful skill. The chapter's organization reflects this combat philosophy. Rather than the rigid structure of Codex-compliant chapters with their specific squad types and predetermined roles, the Space Wolves organize into great companies that are essentially self-contained armies. Each great company contains warriors at different stages of development, from young Bloodclaws to veteran Wolf Guard. And this mixing of experience levels creates a dynamic that enhances combat effectiveness. Bloodclaws are the youngest warriors, those who have recently completed their transformation and are filled with the aggression and reckless courage of youth. They are organized into packs and hurled at the enemy in shock assaults, their fury and fearlessness overwhelming defenders before they can properly organize. Bloodclaws are expected to be aggressive to the point of recklessness. They compete with each other for kills, take unnecessary risks to prove their courage, and generally behave in ways that would get them disciplined in other chapters. But the Space Wolves understand that this is a phase, that the youngest warriors need to burn off their excess aggression, and that controlling and directing this youthful fury is more effective than trying to suppress it. As warriors mature and survive their early battles, they are promoted to Grey Hunter packs. These are the backbone of any great company, warriors who have tempered their youthful aggression with experience, but who still possess the strength and speed to fight at the highest level. Grey Hunters are versatile, capable of both ranged combat and close-quarters battle, able to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. They have learned to fight as a pack, coordinating their actions with practiced ease, trusting in each other's abilities. A pack of Grey Hunters can handle nearly any tactical situation, from holding a defensive position to conducting a rapid assault. The most experienced warriors often become Wolf Guard, veterans who have survived centuries of warfare and earned the right to wear the finest war gear the chapter possesses. Wolfguard serve multiple roles. Some join packs of Bloodclaws or Grey Hunters as pack leaders, providing the voice of experience that helps focus the younger warriors' efforts. Others form elite Terminator squads, clad in ancient suits of tactical dreadnought armor and armed with the chapter's most powerful weapons. These Wolfguard Terminators are deployed to the most critical points in any battle, sent to crack the toughest enemy positions or hold vital ground against overwhelming odds. At the eldest end of the spectrum are the Longfangs, warriors who have earned the right to step back slightly from the front lines. These are not soldiers past their prime, far from it. They are warriors whose centuries of experience have taught them patience, who have learned that sometimes the best way to serve is not charging headlong into combat, but providing supporting fire from carefully chosen positions. Longfangs crew heavy weapons with the skill that only centuries of practice can provide. They can drop artillery shells with pinpoint accuracy, can track and destroy enemy armor at extreme range, can lay down suppressing fire that allows their younger pack brothers to close with the enemy. This organizational structure creates a synergy that makes Space Wolves' forces greater than the sum of their parts. Blood Claws smash into enemy lines, their fury disrupting formations and creating chaos. Grey Hunters exploit the openings, pushing deep into enemy territory with practiced precision. Wolf Guards strike at critical points, their elite status allowing them to go where they're needed most. And throughout all of this, Longfangs provide fire support, their heavy weapons eliminating threats that might otherwise devastate their charging brothers. The Space Wolves also make extensive use of specialized units that reflect their unique culture. Wolfen packs, when deployed, are devastating shock troops. Swift Claws race into battle on bikes, their speed allowing them to rapidly respond to threats or exploit weaknesses in enemy lines. Sky Claws assault from above on jump packs, descending on the enemy like predatory birds. Wolf Scouts, warriors who have chosen to master stealth and reconnaissance rather than glory in direct combat, infiltrate enemy territory ahead of the main force, gathering intelligence and sabotaging key installations. Pack tactics are fundamental to the Space Wolves' approach to battle. They do not fight as individuals, but as coordinated units, each warrior aware of his brother's positions and capabilities. This allows them to employ sophisticated maneuvers that can overwhelm enemies who outnumber them. A pack might split up to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, trusting that they'll converge on the target at precisely the right moment. They might use feints and distractions, one warrior drawing the enemy's attention while others strike from unexpected angles. They might flow around obstacles like water, each warrior taking the path that best serves the pack's overall goal rather than competing for personal glory. This tactical flexibility stands in stark contrast to more rigid chapters. An Ultramarines tactical squad has clear roles for each member.
The sergeant leads, the heavy weapons specialist provides fire support, the special weapons specialist tackles specific threats, and the bolter-armed brothers provide the core firepower. This structure works well and has proven itself over 10,000 years, but it lacks the adaptability of Space Wolves' pack tactics, where every warrior can fluidly shift roles based on the situation. The Space Wolves also employ auxiliary forces in ways that other chapters rarely do. They maintain close relationships with mortal warriors, the Carrolls of Fenris who guard the Fang and serve the chapter in non-combat roles. In major conflicts, these Carrolls might fight alongside the Space Wolves, providing weight of numbers that allows the Astartes to focus on the most critical objectives. The chapter also works extensively with the Thunder Wolf Cavalry, warriors mounted on the enormous Thunder Wolves native to Fenris. These cavalry units provide mobility and shock power, capable of rapid redeployment around the battlefield and devastating charges that can break enemy formations. Perhaps most distinctive are the Space Wolves' dreadnoughts. These walking tombs contain the remains of fallen warriors too valuable to lose, heroes whose bodies were shattered, but whose spirits were preserved by entombment in a dreadnought's life support sarcophagus. Other chapters treat their dreadnoughts with solemn reverence, waking them only for the most critical battles and then returning them to sleep afterward.
The Space Wolves take a different approach. Their dreadnoughts, particularly the ancient ones who have served for thousands of years, are active members of the chapter. They participate in feasts, though they cannot eat or drink. They tell sagas and hear new ones in turn. They offer counsel to wolf lords planning campaigns. They are not relics to be preserved, but brothers who continue to serve. The most revered of these is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest space marine in existence. Bjorn walked alongside Leman Russ himself during the Horus Heresy. He was present at the burning of Prospero. He fought in the final battles of the heresy and was there when Russ departed on his final journey. For over 10,000 years, Bjorn has served the Space Wolves, waking periodically to fight in critical battles and offer wisdom born of incomparable experience. When Bjorn speaks, even the great wolf listens, for there is no one alive who better understands the chapter's history and traditions. The Space Wolves' combat philosophy extends to their interaction with other Imperial forces. They are not easy allies for more traditional military organizations. They question orders they consider foolish, argue with commanders they think are wrong, and sometimes take actions that seem to contradict the overall battle plan. But those who have fought beside the Space Wolves and who learn to work with, rather than against, their methods, discover that few allies are more valuable. The Space Wolves will hold ground that other forces would abandon. They will assault positions that others consider impregnable, and they will stand by their allies with unwavering loyalty once they have sworn to do so. The burning of Prospero. No event in the Space Wolves' history weighs more heavily on the chapter than the burning of Prospero. This was the moment when the executioners fulfilled their role, when the Emperor's most loyal sons were unleashed against one of their own brother legions. And the consequences of that action still echo through the millennia. To understand the Space Wolves, you must understand this tragedy, the circumstances that led to it, the way it was carried out, and the wounds it left that may never truly heal. The seeds of the burning were planted long before the first shot was fired. Leman Russ and Magnus the Red, primarchs of the Space Wolves and Thousand Sons respectively, had never gotten along. Their philosophies were fundamentally opposed. Magnus was a scholar and sorcerer, a seeker of knowledge who delved deep into the mysteries of the warp and psychic power. He believed that understanding these forces was the key to humanity's future, that psychers properly trained could be the Imperium's greatest asset. Russ, by contrast, distrusted sorcery profoundly. He saw in it a corrupting influence, something that pretended to grant power while actually enslaving its wielders to forces they couldn't control. This conflict came to a head at the Council of Nicaea, where the Emperor gathered his primarchs and the Imperium's leadership to determine policy regarding psychers and the use of psychic powers. Magnus argued passionately for freedom to continue his research, for the right of librarians across all legions to employ their gifts without restriction. Russ argued with equal passion for strict controls, even prohibition. The debate was heated, with both Primarchs making their cases with conviction born of genuine belief in their positions. The Emperor, after hearing all arguments, sided with Russ. The Edict of Nicaea forbade the use of sorcery and placed strict limits on psychic powers within the Legiones Astartes. Librarian departments were to be disbanded. Magnus was humiliated, his life's work seemingly rejected by his own father. But Russ took no pleasure in the victory. He had argued for what he believed was right, for what he thought would protect the Imperium from dangers Magnus either couldn't or wouldn't see. The Council of Nicaea created a wound between the two Primarchs that would fester until it finally erupted in violence. Magnus, despite his oath to obey the Emperor's decree, couldn't abandon his research entirely. When he discovered through sorcerous means that Horus, the War Master and the Emperor's favorite son, had been corrupted by chaos and was planning to betray the Imperium, Magnus faced a terrible dilemma. He needed to warn the Emperor, but all conventional means of communication would take too long. Horus would strike before the message arrived. Magnus made a fateful decision. He would use sorcery to project his consciousness directly to Terra to warn the Emperor in person, regardless of the edict's prohibition. The ritual Magnus performed was staggeringly powerful, perhaps the greatest feat of psychic might ever attempted by a human. He tore through the warp, breached the psychic wards protecting the Imperial Palace, and manifested before the Emperor himself. But, in doing so, Magnus accomplished exactly what Russ had warned about at Nicaea. The psychic breach destroyed decades of work on the Emperor's secret project, the webway gate that would have freed humanity from dependence on warp travel. The Emperor had been working on this in the deepest vaults beneath the palace, and Magnus's uncontrolled intrusion shattered the wards holding back the tides of the warp, unleashing demon hordes into the Imperial dungeon. The Emperor was furious. His son had not only violated the Edict of Nicaea, but had catastrophically damaged the most important project in the Imperium's history. Worse, Magnus's warning about Horus came too late and was delivered in such a way that the Emperor couldn't immediately act on it. The psychic assault appeared to be the action of a rebellious son, not a loyal one trying to deliver a warning. The Emperor ordered Leman Russ to take the Space Wolves to Prospero, homeworld of the Thousand Suns, and bring Magnus back to Terra in chains to answer for his crimes. This was meant to be an arrest, not an execution. Russ was given explicit orders to take Magnus alive. But Horus, already deep in his treachery and working to bring as much of the Imperium down with him as possible, intercepted the orders. He contacted Russ directly, as War Master, and told him that the Emperor's orders had changed. Magnus had proven his corruption beyond doubt. The Thousand Suns were to be destroyed, not captured. Prospero was to burn. What followed has been debated by Imperial historians for 10 millennia. Did Russ question these new orders? Did he suspect Horus's treachery? Or did he, perhaps on some level, welcome the chance to destroy the Legion he'd always considered dangerously tainted? The sagas preserved by the Space Wolves suggest that Russ did have doubts, that he tried one final time to contact Magnus and arrange a surrender. But Magnus, racked by guilt over what his psychic intrusion had done, and believing the Emperor had sent Russ to destroy him regardless, refused to respond. He ordered his Legion to stand down, to not resist the Space Wolves' attack, believing that accepting punishment was the only way to atone for his mistakes. The Space Wolves arrived at Prospero with the full strength of their Legion, accompanied by elements of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guardians, and the Sisters of Silence, anti-psyker warriors whose very presence nullified psychic powers. They descended on the planet with overwhelming force, and what they found was a world utterly unprepared for war. The Thousand Sons were not arrayed for battle. They were in their libraries and meditation chambers, their weapons stored, their defenses minimal. It should have been obvious that this was not a Legion preparing for rebellion, but one that had been caught completely off guard. But the attack had already begun. The Space Wolves fell upon Prospero with the fury of the betrayed, for in their minds, Magnus had proven everything Russ had warned about at Nicaea. He had used sorcery, had violated the Emperor's decree, had struck at Terra itself. This was vindication, proof that the Thousand Sons could not be trusted. The fact that Magnus had been trying to warn of Horus's treachery was unknown to them, lost in the manipulation and miscommunication that Horus had orchestrated. The burning of Prospero was a massacre. The Thousand Sons finally roused to defend themselves when it became clear the Space Wolves meant to exterminate them, fought with desperate courage. Magnus himself eventually joined the battle, his guilt giving way to rage as he watched his sons being slaughtered. The psychic might of the Thousand Sons clashed with the raw physical power of the Space Wolves in battles that turned entire city blocks into burning ruins. Buildings collapsed under the weight of unleashed energies. The very fabric of reality grew thin as sorcery and counter-sorcery tore at the warp. Leman Russ and Magnus the Red met in personal combat. The two Primarchs, brothers who had never liked each other but who had once at least respected each other's abilities, now fought with the intent to kill. The duel was titanic, both Primarchs unleashing powers that would have destroyed lesser beings. Magnus wielded sorcery that could reshape reality, throwing eldritch fire and summoning constructs of pure warp energy. Russ countered with the Spear of Russ, a weapon specifically designed to harm psychers, and with the raw physical might that made him one of the deadliest close combat fighters among all the Primarchs. The duel ended when Russ drove his spear through Magnus's eye, shattering it and inflicting a wound that would never truly heal. Magnus, in agony, and realizing that further resistance was futile, made a desperate bargain with the Chaos God Tzeentch. He and his surviving legion were pulled into the warp, escaping complete destruction, but binding themselves to the service of chaos in the process. Prospero was left a burning ruin, its great libraries reduced to ash, its population decimated, its purpose destroyed. The Space Wolves withdrew from Prospero, believing they had fulfilled their duty. They had destroyed a treacherous legion that had defied the Emperor's decree and attacked Terra itself. They had proven that no one, not even a Primarch, was above imperial law. But as the full truth of Horus's treachery emerged in the months and years that followed, Russ began to understand what had really happened. He had been
Manipulated, used as a weapon against a brother who had been trying, however misguidedly, to serve the Emperor. The Thousand Sons had not been traitors preparing for rebellion. They had been victims of circumstance, caught between Magnus's mistake and Horus's manipulation. This realization haunted Russ for the rest of his life. He had fulfilled his role as executioner perfectly, but he had executed the wrong target. The warrior who prided himself on his loyalty and sense of justice had been tricked into committing what might have been the greatest injustice of the heresy. Magnus, who might have been redeemed, who might have fought for the Emperor during the civil war that followed, was instead driven into the arms of chaos. The Thousand Sons, who could have been a powerful asset for the loyalist cause, became enemies instead. The burning of Prospero also created a permanent enmity between the Space Wolves and the Thousand Sons that persists into the present day. The Thousand Sons, now Chaos Space Marines fully dedicated to Tzeentch, consider the Space Wolves their eternal enemies. They raid Fenris when opportunity permits, not for strategic gain, but for revenge. Magnus himself has returned to lead these attacks on multiple occasions, his hatred for Russ and his sons undiminished after 10,000 years. He sees in every Space Wolf a reminder of his betrayal, of the moment when his warnings were rejected and his legion was destroyed. The Space Wolves, for their part, recognize that they were manipulated, but do not shy away from their actions. They acknowledge that they were the instrument of Prospero's destruction, that the blood of the Thousand Sons is on their hands. But they also maintain that they acted according to their orders and their understanding of the situation. They were loyal when Magnus was not. The fact that Horus manipulated events doesn't change the underlying truth that Magnus violated the Emperor's decree and caused immense damage to the Imperial project. This complexity, this recognition that they were both right and wrong, loyal and manipulated, dutiful and tragic, marks the Space Wolves' understanding of the burning. They do not pretend it didn't happen, or claim they bear no responsibility. The Sagas recount the battle in full detail, including the verses that speak of Russ's later doubts and regrets. But neither do they wallow in guilt or allow the tragedy to paralyze them. They learn from Prospero that loyalty alone is not enough, that even the most faithful can be deceived, that executing orders without questioning their source can lead to catastrophe. The lesson the Space Wolves took from Prospero has shaped their actions in the 10 millennia since. They remain loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, but they have become more willing to question authority, to challenge orders they believe are wrong, to stand against even the Inquisition when they judge that the Inquisitors have overstepped their bounds.
This has brought them into conflict with other imperial institutions on multiple occasions. The First War for Armageddon saw Logan Grimnar defy the Inquisition's order to purge the entire population of survivors who had fought against chaos. The months of shame that followed nearly escalated into civil war before cooler heads prevailed. The Space Wolves' willingness to stand up to authority figures, to say no when they believe an order is unjust, stems directly from their experience at Prospero. They will not be manipulated again. They will not be used as unthinking weapons against targets they haven't personally judged worthy of destruction. This makes them difficult allies for more authoritarian elements of the Imperium, but it also makes them invaluable when moral courage is needed, when someone must stand up and say that following orders is not the same as doing what's right. The rivalry with the Thousand Sons continues to this day, flaring into open warfare whenever the two forces encounter each other. These battles are personal in ways that most conflicts in the 41st millennium are not. When Space Wolves fight orcs or Tyranids, they fight enemies that are clearly other, clearly alien. When they fight Chaos Cultists or Traitor Guard, they fight humans who have fallen to corruption. But when they fight the Thousand Sons, they fight brothers who fell because the Space Wolves themselves pushed them into the warp's embrace. It's a wound that never heals, a grudge that cannot be settled because both sides have legitimate grievances. Magnus himself remains obsessed with the Space Wolves. During the recent conflicts of the Gathering Storm, he led a massive invasion of Fenris, bringing the full might of his demon world Sortiarius into real space near the Space Wolves' homeworld. The resulting battles devastated Fenris, destroying much of the planet's ecosystem and forcing the Space Wolves to abandon many of their traditional recruiting grounds. Magnus wanted to do to Fenris what the Space Wolves had done to Prospero, to inflict the same pain he had suffered. He succeeded only partially. The Fang still stands. The chapter survives, but the cost was enormous. The burning of Prospero remains the Space Wolves' greatest shame and their most complete victory, their finest hour of loyalty, and their most catastrophic failure of judgment. It is the moment that defines them, for better and worse, and every Space Wolf knows the saga of that terrible day when the wolves of Fenris burned the City of Light and damned a brother legion to eternal service to chaos. The Wolf Time and Return. In the depths of the Fang, in chambers where only the Great Wolf and the most senior rune priests venture, there are prophecies carved in runes so ancient that their meanings have become obscure. These speak of the Wolf Time, the end of days when the greatest battle of all will be fought, and when Leman Russ will return to lead his sons one final time. This prophecy shapes the Space Wolves' worldview in fundamental ways, giving them a sense of purpose that extends beyond the immediate conflicts of the present into a cosmic narrative that will only be resolved at the very end. The Wolf Time is not precisely defined. The prophecies speak of it in symbolic language that can be interpreted many ways. There will be a time of great darkness, when the enemies of mankind converge from all sides, when even Terra itself faces extinction. In that hour, when all seems lost, the Wolf King will return from his long journey in the Eye of Terror. He will blow the horn of fate, calling all his sons to gather for the last battle. The space wolves will answer, coming from wherever they are scattered across the galaxy, assembling at the Fang, or perhaps at Terra itself, for the final confrontation. What happens after that varies depending on which version of the prophecy you consult. Some speak of glorious victory, of Russ leading his sons in a battle that will finally destroy the enemies of mankind once and for all. Others are darker, speaking of last stands and noble deaths, of going down fighting against impossible odds. But all versions agree on the central point. Russ will return, and the Space Wolves will fight their greatest battle in his presence. This belief in the wolf time gives the Space Wolves a particular perspective on the current state of the Imperium. To many observers, the 41st millennium represents a terminal decline, a slow-motion apocalypse as the Imperium gradually loses ground to its many enemies. But the Space Wolves do not see inevitable defeat in this. They see, perhaps, the approaching wolf time. The Imperium is besieged on all sides. The Great Rift has torn reality in half. Daemon Primarchs walk among the stars again. This could be the gathering darkness the prophecies spoke of, which means Russ's return may be imminent. This creates a sense of anticipation rather than despair. Every Space Wolf knows that he might be among the generation that sees the Wolf King return. He might have the honor of fighting alongside Leman Russ in the final battle. His saga might include verses about standing beside the Primarch at the end of all things. This is both inspiring and humbling. Inspiring because it means your service has ultimate meaning, that you're not just fighting a holding action, but preparing for a climactic confrontation. Humbling because it means you must be worthy of that moment, must ensure that when Russ returns, he finds sons who have upheld his legacy and maintained the standards he set. The Great Hunt tradition stems from this belief in Russ's eventual return. Periodically, usually when portents suggest the wolf time might be approaching, the Great Wolf will declare a great hunt. All 12 great companies deploy simultaneously, each taking a different vector into the galaxy, searching for any sign of their missing Primarch. They pursue rumors and legends, investigate reports of massive warriors matching Russ's description, follow psychic visions that might indicate his location. The Great Hunts have never found concrete evidence of Russ, but the Space Wolves conduct them anyway, because the act of searching is itself a form of faith. Some Imperial scholars argue that Russ is dead, that he fell in the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, and his remains lie lost in some benighted demon world. Others suggest he achieved apotheosis, ascending to become something more than Primarch, perhaps even joining the Emperor in some spiritual realm. The Space Wolves reject both theories. They believe with absolute conviction that Russ still lives, still wanders somewhere in the galaxy or beyond it, and that he will return when needed most. This is not wishful thinking or refusal to accept reality. It is faith, pure and simple. The same faith that allows warriors to charge into impossible odds, trusting that their brothers will stand beside them. The disappearance of Leman Russ occurred under circumstances that fuel this faith. After the heresy, Russ seemed increasingly troubled. The war had cost him dearly. He had lost brothers, both the Primarchs who fell fighting for Horus and those who died defending the Emperor. He had been used as a weapon against Magnus, creating a wound that no amount of victory could heal. He had fought Horus himself and failed to land the killing blow, allowing the War Master to survive and continue the war. The weight of these failures, real or perceived, bore heavily on the Wolf King. During the feast of the Emperor's Ascension, a celebration marking another year of the Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne, Russ stood before his assembled legion and spoke. He told them that in the end, he would return for the final battle, for the Wolf Time. Then he selected his 13 most trusted warriors, his Einherjar, and departed. Some accounts say he entered the Eye of Terror, seeking something in that realm of madness. Others say he simply walked into the wilderness of Fenris and vanished. Either way, he was gone, and the Space Wolves were left without their father. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, Russ's chosen successor, led the Legion in his absence, but Bjorn never claimed to replace Russ, only to keep his seat warm until the Primarch's return. This attitude has persisted through every great wolf since. They are caretakers, not replacements. They lead the chapter with full authority, but always with the understanding that this authority is temporary, that when Russ returns, leadership will revert to him without question or hesitation. The prophecies of the Wolf Time speak of signs that will herald Russ's return. The skies will burn with strange colors. The enemies of mankind will mass for a final assault. Heroes will fall, and new ones will rise. The Emperor's light will flicker, but not fade. Some Space Wolves believe these signs are already manifest. The Great Rift certainly fits the description of burning skies. The return of Gilliman and his Primaris reinforcements could be interpreted as new heroes rising. The endless sieges and battles across the Imperium look very much like enemies massing for a final assault. But others urge caution, arguing that every generation believes it lives in the end times, that apocalyptic thinking can become self-fulfilling if it leads to reckless action. The Rune Priests particularly counsel patience, reminding their brothers that prophecies are notorious for coming true in unexpected ways. The Wolf Time will come when it comes, and all the Space Wolves can do is prepare, maintain their honor, and ensure that when Russ does return, he finds a chapter worthy of his name. This preparation takes many forms. Every space wolf strives to add worthy verses to his personal saga, so that when the wolf time comes, his deeds will reflect well on the chapter. Great companies pursue campaigns that test them, seeking out the most dangerous enemies and the most challenging missions, because Russ would expect his sons to be at their sharpest. The chapter as a whole works to maintain Fenris despite the damage it has suffered, to preserve the recruiting grounds that produce the warriors who will fight in the final battle. The Space Wolves also work to settle old debts and honor old oaths, ensuring that when the wolf time arrives, they will have no obligations that could distract from their primary duty. This sometimes manifests in seemingly strange ways. A wolf lord might suddenly launch a campaign to fulfill an oath sworn centuries earlier by one of his predecessors, not because the oath's objective is strategically important, but because leaving it unfulfilled would be shameful. The chapter maintains relationships with particular Imperial Guard regiments and planetary governments, connections that go back thousands of years, because these allies might be called upon when the final battle comes. There is also a practical aspect to the Wolftime prophecies. By maintaining belief in Russ's return and the coming final battle, the Space Wolves give themselves a narrative framework that makes sense of the Imperium's endless conflicts. Instead of fighting battle after battle with no end in sight, each conflict becomes preparation for the ultimate test. Every enemy defeated is one fewer that will stand against them in the wolf time. Every warrior trained is another sword arm for Russ when he returns. This framework provides meaning and purpose that might otherwise be lacking in the grinding wars of the 41st millennium. The recent return of Rabute Gilliman has intensified speculation about the wolf time. If one Primarch can return after 10,000 years, why not another? Gilliman's resurrection proved that the Primarchs are not permanently lost, that they can come back when the Imperium needs them most. The Space Wolves see this as vindication of their faith. They were right to believe in Russ's return. It's not wishful thinking, but reasonable expectation based on precedent. If Gilliman came back, Russ can too. Some Space Wolves have sought audience with Gilliman, asking if he knows anything about Russ's fate or whereabouts. Gilliman's answers have been carefully diplomatic. He acknowledges that Russ could return, but he neither confirms nor denies the prophecies of the wolf time. He treats the Space Wolves with respect, recognizing that their faith in their Primarch's return is genuine and serves a valuable psychological purpose. But he doesn't encourage apocalyptic thinking that might lead them to rash action. The relationship between the current Space Wolves and their missing Primarch is complex. They revere Russ, certainly, preserving his teachings and striving to live up to his example. But they are not paralyzed by his absence. They do not spend all their time searching for him or waiting passively for his return. Instead, they fight with the same ferocity and determination they would show if Russ were watching. Because in a sense, they believe he is watching. Whether from some hidden location in real space, or from beyond the veil of reality, the Wolf King observes his son's deeds, and they must be worthy of his pride. This creates a powerful motivational framework.
A space wolf going into battle doesn't just fight for the Emperor or the Imperium or his brothers, though all these are important. He fights for Russ, to prove that his Primarch's gene seed was not wasted on him, to add verses to his saga that Russ himself might someday hear recited. When a warrior falls, his brothers console themselves with the thought that his saga will be preserved, that when the wolf time comes, and all the space wolves who ever lived gather for the final battle, this fallen brother's deeds will be remembered and honored. The wolf time prophecies also affect how the space wolves view death and sacrifice. In many chapters, death in battle is seen as fulfilling your duty, an honorable end to a life of service. The space wolves see it similarly, but with an additional dimension. Death in battle before the wolf time means you won't be present for the final confrontation, won't stand beside Russ in the ultimate test. This creates a peculiar dynamic where space wolves fight with extraordinary courage, willing to die for their brothers and their cause, but also with a certain caution, a desire to survive long enough to see the prophecies fulfilled. This balance between courage and caution is one of the defining characteristics of Space Wolves' tactical doctrine. They are not reckless, despite their reputation for ferocity. A Bloodclaw might seem to charge blindly into enemy fire, but there's usually method to his aggression, a calculation about acceptable risk versus potential gain. Grey Hunters coordinate their assaults with practiced precision, each warrior taking risks, but doing so in ways that the pack can support. Even the most aggressive space wolf wants to survive, not out of cowardice, but because survival means
Another chance to fight, another battle to add to his saga, another step closer to the wolf time. The Fang itself stands as both fortress and monument to the belief in Russ's return. Deep within its ancient halls is a chamber known as the Hall of the Great Wolf, where Russ's throne sits empty, waiting for its rightful occupant. No one else has ever sat in that throne since Russ departed. Great wolves conduct business from other seats, lesser chairs that make clear they are temporary occupants of the position. The throne waits, preserved and honored, a physical symbol of the chapter's faith that one day their Primarch will return and reclaim his rightful place. Conclusion. We've traveled far tonight, from the frozen wastes of Fenris to the burning ruins of Prospero, from the halls of the Fang where sagas are sung, to battlefields across the galaxy where space wolves fight and die in service to the Emperor. We've explored what makes the Sons of Russ unique among Space Marines: their tribal culture, their unstable gene seed, their emphasis on oaths and sagas, their preference for close combat, and their unshakable faith in their Primarch's eventual return. The Space Wolves stand as perhaps the most distinctive chapter in the Adeptus Astartes. They have rejected the Codex Astartes in favor of their own traditions. They maintain practices that other chapters consider barbaric or superstitious. They organize themselves not according to imperial doctrine, but according to the ancient ways of their homeworld. And yet, for all their eccentricity, they are among the most loyal and effective fighting forces the Imperium possesses. This is because the Space Wolves understand something that many other chapters have forgotten. They understand that humanity's strength lies not in cold logic or rigid doctrine, but in the bonds between warriors, in the stories that connect each generation to those who came before, in the oaths that give meaning to sacrifice. They fight not because they have been programmed to do so, not out of grim duty alone, but because they are warriors in the truest sense, men who have chosen this life and who find in it purpose and brotherhood and glory. The Way of Fenris is a hard path. The curse of the Wolfen claims warriors who have served honorably for centuries. The harsh environment of Fenris kills many aspirants before they ever reach the Fang. The oath culture creates obligations that can become impossible to fulfill. The emphasis on personal sagas can lead to recklessness in pursuit of glory. But those who walk this path successfully become something extraordinary. Warriors who combine the superhuman capabilities of space marines with the savage honor of Fenrisian tribal culture, creating a synthesis that is greater than either component alone. As the Imperium faces its darkest hour, as the Great Rift tears reality in half and ancient enemies return to plague humanity, the Space Wolves stand ready. They have endured for 10,000 years, maintaining their traditions and their honor through crusades and sieges, through victories and defeats, through times of plenty and times of desperate scarcity. They have refused to compromise their identity even when pressured to conform. They have remained true to the teachings of Leman Russ even in his absence. And they wait, as they have waited for 10 millennia, for the wolf time to arrive and their Primarch to return. When that day comes, when the horn of fate sounds and Leman Russ walks among his sons once more, the Space Wolves will be ready. They will present him with sagas of 10,000 years of loyal service. They will show him a chapter that has maintained his standards and upheld his honor. And they will follow him into the final battle with the same ferocity and loyalty their ancestors showed at the heresy's beginning. Until that day comes, the Space Wolves will continue to fight. They will hunt the enemies of mankind across the stars. They will swear oaths and fulfill them. They will add new verses to ancient sagas. They will drink and feast and tell stories in the halls of the Fang. They will train new warriors, passing on the traditions that make them what they are. And with every battle, every oath fulfilled, every saga told, they will prove that the Way of Fenris endures, that the sons of Russ remain true, and that when the final test comes, they will be ready. For the Space Wolves, the Vulca Fenrica, the Wolves of Fenris. Loyalty is not a policy, but an identity. Honor is not a concept, but a lived reality. Brotherhood is not sentimentality, but the foundation of everything they are. They are warriors, predators, brothers, and they will endure as long as Fenris endures, as long as wolves howl in the mountain snows, as long as warriors gather around fires to tell tales of glory and sacrifice. If you've enjoyed this deep exploration into the Space Wolves and their unique place in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to see more content like this. There are so many more stories to tell from the grim darkness of the far future, so many more chapters and factions and conflicts to explore.
The Space Wolves are just one thread in the vast saga of the Imperium. But what a thread it is, woven with loyalty and savagery, honor and ferocity, tradition and adaptability. Thank you for joining me on this journey to Fenris. May your oaths be true, your sagas worthy of remembrance, and your pack brothers always at your side. For Russ and the Allfather, for Fenris and the Fang. Fenris Hjolda. Until next time, good night.